Hello everyone, my name is Paul. Welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone's having a fantastic day. I hope you've had a wonderful time while we've been on break. I hope that you've had a very Merry Christmas and happy holidays. And I hope that you, your family, and your friends are safe. And if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. There is a ton of stuff that has happened over the last 6 days since we decided to take our holiday break. And there is a lot to get caught up on, especially when it comes to the war ongoing inside of Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, as well as many different developments inside the country of Russia itself, across Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and the rest of the globe. And we'll be covering all the top stories tonight for you guys in our live stream here. Now, the whole point of us doing this is not only to inform you as an individual, but also to inform, to help raise money and to help give back to these situations. In fact, our motto is to be the news that gives back, and the way that we're able to do that is through you guys. Here on the channel, we're never doing any kind of super chats, we're never doing any kind of promotions or merchandising or any kind of monetization for personal gain. 100% of everything we do here at the new news is going to help people. We're 100% charity driven. We will never try and make a cent off of anybody else's misery here. And so please be sure to check out in the video description below all the different organizational links that are provided there for you guys. We've gone through and vetted them all ourselves, and two things that we are looking for when going through and vetting organizations and individuals is to make sure that these are credible. First of all, we want to make sure that your money is going to where it says it's supposed to be going. We do that through a number of ways in our vetting process to ensure that it is safe for you, but as always, still use caution no matter what. And the second thing we look for is that 70% or more of those of the different donations here go directly to the program, meaning they go directly to helping people all across the globe, and emphasis on the or more. We are working to add more organizations constantly, and if you have any suggestions, please be sure to send them to us. And so regardless if you want to support the war effort in Ukraine, you want to help with humanitarian efforts, reconstruction efforts, if you want to help humanitarian efforts when it comes to Afghanistan, or if you want to help the efforts in Somalia, Ethiopia, or wherever else in the globe we have been able to provide for you, please be sure to go and check them out. And if, as always, please go through if you want to look them up yourselves. I highly recommend going through and checking out organizations such as Charity Navigator, which assists in the vetting process. And so please help us be the news that gives back. We want to help out as many people affected by these situations all over the globe. And according to the World Food Program's director over there at the United Nations, 345 million people right now are marching towards starvation, quote unquote. So that is kind of what we're trying to work with here, and we're trying to help as many people as possible and be as much of a force for good as possible while being informative. So please be sure to check those all out. And if you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, trust me, I 100% understand. One of the biggest things you can do is help us grow our outreach, grow our impact, because the more people that come here and watch the news and join in with this community, the more help we'll be able to give people overall as we continue to grow. So I hate to ask for it, but that like, subscribe, and things like that do help us significantly with that outreach. So thank you very much for the support you've already given us and are giving to these organizations even more so. As we get ready to move into the news here, I am watching a live chat, so if you're joining us tonight, please feel free to talk here in the live chat, and please go ahead and ask questions and make comments. I will address them, and I will be reading them throughout the entirety of the stream, and I will address them on stream throughout the night. So please be sure to ask. To give you a little bit of a background on myself, if you guys are new here possibly, then please, to give you a little bit of a background here, I served in the Marine Corps between 2016 and 2020. I served with 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, where I did 2 tours to the Middle East. Specifically, I was a corporal and No 352 anti-tank missileman, and I went to the Middle East. My first tour was between October of 2017 and March of 2018, where I served there with the Special Purpose MAGTF, Crisis Response Central Command, and I went to Syria specifically. So I was attached to Special Operations Forces and assisted both Special Operations Forces coalition partners as well as the SDF, mostly the YPG, in the fight against the Islamic State and also stabilization efforts within the country. After that, I came back where I ran an armory and did a lot of logistics stuff as a B billet, and then I went back to the Middle East between October of 2019 and March of 2020, where I was the Javelin team leader for the crisis response company out of Kuwait, where I spent the majority of my time. On New Year's 2020, I actually went to Baghdad in response to the 4,000 protesters attempting to overrun the U.S. Embassy, where I oversaw all anti-armor operations over the Baghdad Embassy complex. From there, I went to Saudi Arabia, where I trained Saudi Arabian Marines preparing for a deployment into Yemen. I'm a subject matter expert in anti-armor warfare and armor doctrine, but I'm also a fully cross-trained machine gunner, a fully cross-trained rifleman, a partially cross-trained radio operator, as well as a CLS or Combat Life Server Certified Marine, meaning I've received additional medical training on top of what is normally provided to most infantry personnel. And so I also try to remain well-rounded outside of those expertise fields, including things such as geopolitics, history, human geography, and a wide spectrum of other things I just find interesting, but I claim not to be an expert in any of those. Expert or not, the most imperative thing is that you as a viewer, please do your own research. There is no substitute for your own research. I highly implore you to go through and do it yourself. And if you want a starting point, feel free to go and check out our map here. It's provided at our website. The link's in the description. And each of these is uploaded every single night before the stream once it has been completed with all of our research, with additional links for anything that you may find interesting if you would like a starting point. Otherwise, we have the information provided to you here throughout the stream. So thank you guys very much, and it's happy to see everybody here already getting into it in the live chat. And we will get ready to jump right here into the news as always. We're starting, of course, with our special report coming out of the country of Ukraine. Now, it's a very grim Christmas, and it's a grim Christmas for many reasons. Of course, Christmas was this weekend, so the 24th and 25th, and there's been a lot of speculation on what was going to happen, and unfortunately, some of that speculation ended up being true. But that doesn't mean that there weren't interesting, or presumably in some people's eyes, good things that happened throughout the duration of the holiday. And something we don't talk about here on the channel as a rule of thumb is casualties, and especially those combat casualties, the troop numbers that have been killed and wounded and what have you, because the reality is that they're more than likely horrifically inaccurate, and we've seen this play out throughout history where such casualty numbers were horrifically either they were very inflated or deflated depending on who was telling the story. In Ukraine's case, it would be inflation. In Russia's case, it would be significant deflation in those numbers. Well, the news came out from Ukraine reporting that they had killed, in a very grim jubilee, they had killed 100,000 Russian soldiers. So, since February the 24th, Ukraine is claiming, by their estimates, to have killed 100,000 Russian troops. This is a very significant number. This is a very large number. To give you an idea into the size and scope of that, throughout the entire 10 years that the Soviets had invaded the country of Afghanistan, right before their collapse, they suffered roughly 50,000 total casualties. So about 17,000 of those were individuals who were killed in action, while an additional roughly 35 to 40,000 were wounded in action or presumed missing. And so throughout that entire time, about 50,000 Russian troops in the entire 10 years that they spent in the Soviet-Afghan War, and that was one of the key factors that led to the complete collapse of the Soviet Union. It was one of the final big nails in the coffin, because it wasn't very long after that, in 1991, when the Soviet Union officially collapses and turns into the Russian Federation, as well as the former Soviet bloc splits apart, sometimes very violently, sometimes not so much, and we see a lot of independent nations come about, including the independent nation of Ukraine. So it had significant, profound impact in the Soviet culture. Now, this war and the information from it on the Russian side is very brutally suppressed, and we'll get to some of that, especially when it comes to the criticism here later. But regardless, we do know, accurate or not, that this war is best described as a meat grinder. It's a war of attrition. Each opponent here is trying to whittle the other down, is trying to drain their opponent of their resources and their will to fight, until finally someone reaches a breaking point and the entire thing collapses. It's very similar to World War I and how the fight went there. We can see similarities playing out here in the war here in Ukraine. Now, should it prove true that 100,000 have been killed, it would blow the casualty rates out of the water for a modern war. World War II probably best illustrates this. The United States in the entirety of World War II lost roughly about 400,000 troops in total throughout the entire duration of the world's bloodiest conflict. Now, we've seen the Soviet Union and the Russian Federation following that history, that historical path, taking significant numbers of casualties before. World War I looking at over 1.5 million. World War II, conservative estimates put it at 27 million. The very liberal estimates put it up as high as 80 million casualties throughout the war. And keep in mind, at 100,000 should it be true, that is just what Ukraine is saying that they have killed. That does not include the 2 to 3 times that amount, statistically speaking, that would be considered wounded in action. Some of these individuals having been wounded multiple times and sent back into service after receiving minor treatment. So, very significant number. True or not, we do know that this war is extremely bloody, and that the casualties, which we can physically see day in and day out as we're going through and researching this, are horrific, especially on the Russian side. And we do see Ukrainian casualties. There's been talk, even Ursula von der Leyen saying herself during a speech, something I think was a little bit not covered. It really wasn't covered. But she said, 100,000 Ukrainians have been killed. But it was kind of glossed over. We're unsure if that number is true or not. But we do know that for both sides, it has been extremely bloody. And that is not looking to stop. And they call it a grim jubilee, is what they're saying. So this is coming from the Ukrainian Air Force, another achievement of the Russian army, quote unquote. They said the Armed Forces of Ukraine presents a grim jubilee. 100,000 Russian occupants were eliminated. Same thing coming from, of course, the official Twitter of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. So, and very interesting enough when it comes to this number, it wasn't very long before this, that Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu actually stated that 100,000 soldiers have been recognized with the wars in the 10 months long full-scale war. Nuclear saying that I have forgotten something, as I do every single night, which is not true. I usually get through my first point, and that's as I'm sitting here talking about Shoigu, another very interesting individual made several predictions, and that would be Medvedev. Medvedev is the spokesman for the Kremlin and also former president of Russia, and he had some predictions for 2023, and we can hear some of them here from Army Commander Conscriptovich, an ongoing joke that's been going on here since these conscriptions started back in July. We can see here, quote, Medvedev is truly a genius. It's obvious Poland wants to take West Ukraine, so why won't Ukrainians let us defend them? End quote, coming from Army Commander Conscriptovich. It is a very interesting question, and the thing is that Poland is the least likely to invade the country of Ukraine, despite the fact that Poland is probably the only country that has any legitimate claim to any part of Ukraine. Prior to the invasion of Poland in 1939, Poland actually included the city of Lviv, and under the Soviet and the Soviet and Nazi Ribbentrop Pact, the Soviets actually invaded that section of Poland and actually claimed it as their own. So this historical precedence for both Ukraine and Poland to have any kind of claim over Lviv, but they're some of the closest allies with each other, and there's no chance that Ukraine is going to be invaded from the west. He also heard several other things was stated, talking about the Fourth Reich being rebuilt and all this. It was absolutely crazy. Not really. It's definitely some kind of a mental illness, I think, that we're seeing at play there. We see a challenge was actually presented to a HIMARS battery commander. So HIMARS have been instrumental. We can actually look at this and see a very definitive change in the war and how the war is fought. We can actually see a turning point in some cases as to where the Ukrainians really get the ability to go on a major offensive operation once they get the HIMARS. So we see them really shift how they're operating, going from that defensive into that offensive capability. And we see a HIMARS battery commander that was operating around the city of Bakhmut. Right before President Zelensky, 24 hours actually, before President Zelensky actually flew to Washington, D.C. to give a speech to Congress and meet with President Biden, he actually was in the city of Bakhmut. And this man has stamina that I can only dream of, because I have no idea how he was able to do it. But 24 hours prior to being in Washington, he was in Bakhmut, and he was giving out medals and stuff for gallantry. And the HIMARS commander was being presented with a medal, and he said, "No, please give it to President Biden during your visit." And he actually had a letter for him that he had written and gave it to President Biden there at the White House. And President Biden said in return, we're going to give you a challenge coin. For those that don't know what a challenge coin is, it's exactly what it sounds like. It is a special coin given out. It's kind of like an unofficial award. And I have several that I have gotten over my time in the Corps, spending time in different areas. I received one from the U.S. Embassy. I've gotten several. I have a couple from the embassy, but they're just kind of an unofficial thing. But it's really kind of cool. Different levels have them for different reasons. Some of them are for kind of big things that they can't really talk about, or that you're not really supposed, or you wouldn't really receive like an official award for something, gallantry, what have you. It's just something of note or recognition. And so we see that President Biden actually provided one to this Ukrainian HIMARS commander. And as you can see, that is the challenge coin that he received. So pretty cool. Pretty cool. Kind of envious. And there's a lot of different myths and legends. A lot of it has to deal with going to bars. So supposedly whoever has the best challenge coin, the highest ranking challenge coin at the bar, buys the drinks or whatever. It's the different traditions are for different people, and it totally depends on who you talk to. But I don't think anyone will beat that. Unfortunately, in a little less lighthearted news here, we do get a child casualty update. This one's a little bit different than what we normally get. We normally have a quote from the Prosecutor General's office. Instead, today, we have a very, very distinct graphic. That came out on the 27th, and this is actually coming from the Ukrainian Verkhovna Rada, who posted this. The Verkhovna Rada is the Ukrainian parliament, and they posted this citing the National Police of Ukraine, the Prosecutor General's office, and the National Information Bureau. And so far, according to Ukraine, 450 Ukrainian children have been killed, 868 have been wounded, 332 Ukrainian children are reported missing, and 13,876 have been forcefully deported. Specifically, this is all coming from the Parliamentary Commissioner for Human Rights, and that's coming from their office there at the Verkhovna Rada. We can see this actually being posted here by the Verkhovna Rada in this graphic. And they give us several different lines. If you happen to be an individual who is in Ukraine and knows something about what has happened to a missing child here, then there are numbers and everything here to call. You can make inquiries as well. And this is including from abroad too. If anyone who may be abroad and knows some information regarding this, please go and check this stuff out. So far, there are some good things that came out with this too. So far, 8,537 children have been found, and 125 children were actually returned to Ukraine, which is good news. But definitely overall, not so great. But something that was provided here, and something that we'll be checking more often here as we continue to build our list of sources, is actually this website, childrenofwar.gov.ua. And this actually goes through, and you can see all of the children which are currently wanted. They're either missing or having been deported from Ukraine, and you can scroll through and search them by last name or what have you to actually get an idea and try and find what's going on about said children throughout Ukraine. So this is where they are keeping all of this information updated. If you do have any information, please provide it to the authorities as soon as physically possible. And it's worth mentioning that under the 1949 Geneva Conventions and under the 1993 Rome Statute, which creates the International Criminal Court and International Court of Justice, the transfer of children from one group to another group is actually one of the key indications of genocide against a group of people based off of national origin. So, very important to take note of that. As we continue down here and continue southward, we see an update coming from the Luhansk Oblast. As we move down here into the main bulk of the fighting here, this is in and around the area of Kreminna. Kreminna was the first objective seized by Russian forces within the first 24 hours of the Donbass campaign. That was about where it ended, too. And the Russians have been rolled back to Kreminna at this point with the head of the Luhansk Regional Military Administration, Sergei Haida, posting on his official Twitter, giving updates occasionally, stating that, according to his reports, the Russian command in Kreminna has left the city. This is usually a very clear indicator that Russian forces are expecting the city to fall. They are under significant pressure as Ukrainian forces slowly but surely continue to secure the woods outside of the city and are continuing to push towards the city's defenses, which are in question at this point. We've seen what the Russians are trying to do when it comes to with their defensive lines, and as we've seen so far, they have been relatively unsuccessful at being able to maintain defensive positions, especially over prolonged engagements, such as what we've seen here in and around Kreminna. We can look at the Kharkiv counteroffensive and the Kherson counteroffensive that shows it's only usually a matter of time. Once again, coming from Sergei Haida, and on his official Twitter, we can see a little Christmas hat, of course, and his update coming from the 26th was the military commander of the Russian occupiers has left Kreminna, which the Ukrainian military is approaching, and the fighting is already going on not far from the city. You know that they are in vicinity, according to the reports provided by Sergei Haida, they are around the city of Dniprova, which is over here to the west. Moving further down the line, we come down here and into the Donetsk Oblast, where some of the heaviest fighting has been ongoing. This is the heaviest fighting, really, of the war. The only thing you could compare that maybe equal or worse would be the Battle of Mariupol itself. This is a sector of front lines about 23 miles long that we see immense, and I do mean immense fighting that is almost incapable of being described in words, which is why we are able to provide, luckily, a great deal of photographs and videos to speak for us. But we start here in the Donetsk region, where we take a look at Kramatorsk, which did receive shelling on Christmas. It was suspected that the Russians would try and launch large-scale attacks against Ukrainian cities and Ukrainian forces across the holiday, having, they actually denied any kind of ceasefire for Christmas. And luckily, nobody was injured in that attack. This is coming from Pavel Kolenko, the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration, who stated that nobody was actually injured or killed. It did land in mostly industrial enterprises of the city. In total, we get our latest daily Donetsk update coming once again from Pavel Kolenko, who says, quote, on December 27th, the number of victims of Russian army in Donetsk Oblast increased by 3 injured. And we can see that here being provided to us with a graphic. He releases this. This covers the past 24 hours of every single day. He releases this at 8 a.m. local time every single day. And we can see that those casualties all seem to have occurred in the city of Bakhmut. And we are taking a look at so far since the beginning of the Russians' full-scale invasion on February the 24th until now. So far, 1,281 Ukrainian civilians have been killed, with 2,799 having been injured. This does not include areas of the Donetsk Oblast currently under occupation, including the city of Donetsk itself, Volnovakha, as well as the city of Mariupol, where it's suspected upwards several tens of thousands, if not up towards to 100,000 people were actually killed during that engagement. Working our way towards the actual front lines, Chasiv Yar was struck on the 22nd, which it was, while a number of cities were struck, Chasiv Yar received the worst of it, leaving 1 person dead and 2 injured as Russian shelling ended up striking the city itself. And you can see these are not military targets, as you can see. These are apartment complexes. These are homes, and these were completely obliterated after taking direct hits from Russian artillery. And that brings us to the city of Bakhmut. Bakhmut lies along that front line, and we can actually measure this out, and you can see up here, this is in Belorivka. This is kind of the northern sector of this front line, and it extends all the way down near Zaitsev. And we can see it's about 23 miles long. This sector of the front, this 23 miles, is best described as the most brutal fighting that we have seen really since the beginning of the war. This is some of the most brutal, bloody fighting. There's no way to truly describe it. It is some of the most horrific conditions on the battlefield that it's beyond comprehension in any meaningful way. And that heavy fighting continued over the holiday. In fact, over this 23-mile stretch, it's a war. It's a brutal war of attrition. It really is. And the city itself is all but completely destroyed. The Russians have been indiscriminately bombarding it for months. Just continuous, multiple times a day, indirect fire across the entirety of the city. No building is left untouched. They're all either destroyed or damaged, quite literally leaving a scorched earth policy in its wake. And we see at this point they're in these trenches, and these trenches that are very reminiscent of the First World War, more so than any 21st century battlefield. The victory here is not measured in kilometers, it's measured in mere meters, it's measured in inches. And every single inch of the ground is soaked in blood trying to fight in this region. It is it's unrecognizable. The entire forests have been completely level and splintered into pieces as artillery shells have just completely flattened them. The mud in the climate in this area is brutally cold. The trenches have filled with water. And that water is now freezing because of the cold, and it's literally freezing the boots and the clothes and the uniforms of these troops to their skin. There's no way around it. There's no way to keep clean. Frostbite and disease are, of course, rampant in these kinds of conditions. We see it in the First World War. We've seen it in every war since and before, and we continue to see it here too, much more wreaking havoc on the much less prepared Russian forces. And the Wagner group, who's really spearheading the attack in this area, is doing full frontal assaults on trench lines. Mass wave full frontal assaults against well-defended trench lines with horrific, gruesome results. It's literally a sea of dead. It is World War I in the 21st century here around Bakhmut. And the fighting here is these trenches are changing hands every single day. They're going back and forth in very close combat engagements, sometimes, as has already been recognized, in very brutal hand-to-hand combat within the trenches themselves.
Дай ваш. Есть? Лучшая работа в мире.
Приезжайте до нас.
О,
Вступай до наших.
Гранати кидай. Це нам? Да.
Хто розвертає?
Турнике стоит и кость, наверное, перебита. Все будет Украина. То есть такая у нас настоящая война.
Є два приходи прямо в посадку, можете так туди насипати.
Сколько насыпать?
Мама, я цілий, я в шапці, все добре. З коптера нарахували. На, позицію.
And they get into some of the fighting there, but we definitely have more. You can see what's left of the city here. Once again, every single building is completely destroyed or has been damaged beyond any kind of repair. And there are still civilians living in the city of Bakhmut. Hundreds of them. And this area is considered too hot, too dangerous for any kind of people to go in here and do any kind of, you know, the Red Cross isn't going to go in here. The World Food Program is not going to come in here. These people are on their own, and they're literally surviving by troops as Ukrainian soldiers. As they're going up to these frontline trenches, they're literally taking food out of their bags that they're meant to take with them, and they're handing it to people who are starving in this city. Because there is no humanitarian aid coming into Bakhmut. Unfortunately, it does have a toll. This is from a morgue. And this is the girl. She is holding the hand. This is paratrooper Evhen Basilivsky. He died in around the city of Bakhmut. And it was quoted saying, "I'll forever hold your hand, my hero, and even if you are no longer with us." Volunteer Alla Karpenko. Once again, this war is incurring heavy tolls on both sides.
Дай йому там! Льоха! Льоха! Що ти сховався? Та не по нам! Єбать, ну що зароблено! Що? Та де летить на? Що там вони сиплять нахуй?
So as you're hearing, it sounds like an artillery duel between Ukrainian and Russian artillery doing counter battery against each other.
Бля, казав, що будуть, але чи вже є, не знаю.
Кажуть наші друзі, що вони повинні бути там, але хто значить зараз там, як поняв прийом, я говорю.
Я уточню Фоки. Фока, треба знати, чи наші є на Тереконі.
Повтори.
Треба знати, чи наші є на Тереконі. Бачиш нахуй? Єбанув туди, де огонь вели, блядь, і трохи заткнулись. Кажу, єбанув там, де огонь був, і трохи заткнулись, сука. Да.
Looks like Sniper, they're doing some call outs. Just listen to the cacophony of sound that comes from a battle space. And this is something, obviously, you get used to.
Это, сука, Бахмут, детка, блядь.
I mean, it's just another day at the front line. And we had a very interesting question come in from Bookham 40. It says, it's winter. How much rotation do Ukrainian troops get from the front lines? Daily, weekly, stay in place and rotate within the unit? This is a really good question, and I don't think that's one that we're really going to get a specific answer for. We do know they're being rotated in some way, shape, or form. The Ukrainians have been very open about that, in fact. Now, it is more difficult this time of year because of the Rasputitsa mud. The Rasputitsa mud, it really is, literally translates in Russian to Sea of Mud. And this happens all across of the all across Eastern Europe, essentially. And it turns the entirety of the country in Ukraine to literally impassable mud fields. Difficult to maneuver on these things in foot, and armored vehicles quite literally just sink. And until the permafrost sets in here in the very dead of winter, or if it stays a warm winter, it won't set in at all. It restricts movement to just major paved roads, because we know there's a lot of dirt roads in Ukraine. That stuff gets mudded over too. It literally makes these things almost impossible to maneuver troops on, and that's what makes some of the fighting here extremely difficult. You can see some of the conditions there are just kind of deplorable. The guy in the trenches, that artillery duel was going on, he looks down at his feet and you can just see it's just a cesspool of mud. And that's every single trench. Some of these trenches we've seen guys literally swimming in the water because it's so deep in some places. But we do know that Ukrainian troops are getting rotated. We've seen them getting rotated. We saw throughout the duration of this war where Ukrainian troops, they get rotated and they're kind of relaxed. Their R&R, their rest and relaxation, is they go to Kyiv, they go to Lviv, they go into areas in the north where they provide security in case of a potential invasion from in the north. But they also get to go home, see families, rest up, get a lot of training done. We've also seen them conducting training closer to the lines, but not necessarily on the front. And we see videos where guys have gone back and forth between the front lines, sometimes multiple times a week, sometimes every other week. It really depends on how much combat is really going on. And I see you actually added that too. I suppose it depends on how much combat is occurring within a specific area. We can assume that in Bakhmut that there is some kind of rotation. Probably it's very localized, but it's probably not within the unit. You're probably seeing where companies and platoons or battalions and regiments and what have you are pushing up to the front line. They're taking over the trenches. The guys are getting ready. They go back behind the line, probably going to some of these outlier villages behind the line, but nearby, walking distance. Really, they are hanging out, or they're just going back into the city of Bakhmut, into areas that they have occupied in Bakhmut for military purpose, and then they're getting some rest and relaxation, in bomb shelters and basements and stuff. At this point, not on the front line in the trench, but in the city itself. That's probably where we're at in this sector, in Bakhmut specifically. In other areas where the fighting is a little bit less severe, you're probably seeing a full rotation of troops, a full rip as we would call it. Whereas in other locations, you're probably seeing, much more active sectors. Solidar, Apitin right now, those units are rotating maybe within their unit themselves. Platoon is going out while one platoon is resting, what have you. There's multiple ways to do it. It really depends on the tactical situation. It also depends on how much support you have. If it's just you holding the line and there's nobody else around you to come in and take your place, you got to do what you got to do. And so maybe they do it in 8-hour shifts. Maybe they are doing it every other day. Who knows? And maybe they're not rotating at all because that's how bad it is. But it really depends. And so I don't think it's a good... We do know it's happening. We can see from the morale side of things, we know it's happening for the Ukrainians. not really happening for the Russians, and we can see that really reflected in combat effectiveness. Whereas the Russians are literally running their units until they are annihilated and no longer exist properly as a unit, except on paper. Whereas the Ukrainian forces are being rested, refit, they are getting replacements into their units, they are getting ammunition, new equipment, as they're rotating back off the line. And we're seeing their combat effectiveness just improve over time, even if gradually. So I hope that answers your question there. So this is a little HIMARS for you. Not really, but this is a small MLRS vehicle that someone has made. It's a MLRS Technical. That is terrifying. So someone said, initially it was put out here, this may look like a movie, but it's just another day of Bakhmut, and that is the truth. Now, it does have copyright music to it, but just take a look. This is footage of troops heading up, once again, heading up to the front line of Bakhmut to reinforce it. You can see those are some MI8s providing gunfire support. You can see some Ukrainian troops heading back, and you can see as this huge battle is raging in front of Ukrainian forces here in the distance. That is Bakhmut in front of these guys. That is the battle around Bakhmut. This is a battle that will go down in history. By the way, for those that don't know, that is the co-host Inky. Bookham 40 ended up asking, what size warhead would those have in relation to the small MLRS technical? Probably a 60 millimeter. They're probably rocket pods from attack helicopters such as the Hind. So you're probably looking at 72 millimeter, 60 millimeter rockets. That you're probably seeing attached to these aircraft that are being now repurposed. Their rocket pods are being repurposed in order to act as a small technical MLRS. And you see this being done elsewhere, but the way that Ukraine is doing their stuff, they're really taking ideas that we've seen kind of develop in asymmetric warfare. You're talking about the Islamic State, the Taliban, the YPG, the YPJ, the SDF, pro-Assad fighters, pro-Turkish fighters, and rebel groups. They've taken, they'll take a Hind, they'll take the Hind's rocket pods, and they will set them onto the back of a truck. And it's not accurate, but they now have an MLRS that they can shoot in the general area of where they want it. It works. We also see the same thing. Drones. ISIS was notorious for using, grenades on drones. They're also notorious for exploding midair because they wire the circuit wrong. But we see this, and we really see it being applied in a real way. We see it being applied with some kind of ingenuity on an industrial scale, something that a country would, want to develop for an actual military application, not necessarily just in asymmetric warfare, as of this is what the tools we have are, but as something that is a valid military capability on the battlefield, and then using this stuff to accurately engage targets, like what we see there with that technical. That is a 1989 Toyota Hilux with a rocket pod attached to it, if I ever saw one. But the way that the Ukrainians have gone through and actually engineered the system to make it have accuracy, to make it have fire control systems that aren't just some dude running up behind it and lighting the fuses. They've done something with it they've actually purposely engineered it to be effective. which we see with the drones, the quadcopters dropping grenades and what have you. So it's very, very, very interesting to see that development and that transition from asymmetric warfare, something we would think of from terrorists using, to countries looking at it as a valid military capability. And to give you a little bit of an idea here, this is a little look at the life of a soldier here in Bakhmut, and this is coming from him thanks to our translator, our in-house translator, who said, quote, three air raid in 2 hours. We were on the floor a lot. Coming from their own TikTok.
Да у нас є вже фото.
Вот он я.
Ти покажись, блядь.
Я черный пехотинец.
Сука, дети под землей.
I don't know if you can tell, but they are covered from head to toe with mud. And what, of course, did Russia do for Christmas? War crimes. These are incendiary munitions being used on the city of Bakhmut over Christmas. So we've seen this. So we've seen videos like this before. Looks like there's a really good video there. This is a war crime on several different counts. But I saw a video here. You can take a look.
Там же пацаны якраз поїхали.
Играть ебать! Пидор движься. Куда вы, знаешь?
Да поки хватить, наче не над нами.
Пригорится, сука, блядь!
Погнали через.
So the usage of incendiary munitions actually violates the Geneva Conventions, it violates several different conventions. Specifically, it violates the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, adopted in 1980 or 1980. In 1983, Additional Protocol 3 specifically outlined that the usage of incendiary weapons with really any means of delivery against civilian concentrations, whether personnel or civilian concentrations in regards to infrastructure, was actually a war crime. It was defined as that under the convention, Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, circa 1980. You also see it in international humanitarian law on rule number 85, meaning that the usage of incendiary munitions against military personnel is prohibited unless there is no other weapon system capable of rendering them orders to combat, meaning no longer a combatant. So either way you look at this, being used against a military target or not, this is a war crime. And what these are specifically, these munitions specifically are 9S-22Ms. They are 122 millimeter Grad rockets, 122 millimeter Katyushas, which are fired from the BM-21 Grad system. Grad standing for hail in Russian. It fires 40 round salvos of 122 millimeter Katyushas over a target. These munitions airburst over the target and drop these. And it's great that we have someone here to show this. These are the octagonal cylinders, octagonal. These are the hexagonal cylinders inside of the 9S-22Ms that they are inside of them they shoot these all over the place. They airburst over a target, and thousands of these things rain out around the location and scatter over an area, getting a wider area of spread. These all contain incendiary munitions. Each of these little pellets contains the chemicals needed for an incendiary reaction, and these burn at thousands of degrees and will burn through anything and ignite anything nearby on fire should they come in contact with them and that item be flammable.
Сегодня ночью был прилет. Яма по колено. Всякая хуйня перегоревшая, блядь. А вот что не догорело, блядь. Ого, нихуя уебали, блядь.
So we do know that that is very much a confirmed usage of incendiary munitions. There is an 18 plus section that we have here if you guys are checking out on the map. This is not something that we will show on stream, but I think it's important because we've talked about it quite a bit, and I think it was important to add it, but not necessarily show it. This is quite literally a sea of bodies. And when I say, we've talked about it before, of the Wagner group conducting wave-style attacks against literally running into machine gun fire. They're literally running in front of 50 caliber machine guns, and it's quite literally cutting them in half. It's a horrific, gruesome scene, and what we see here is, at first glimpse, the photo really doesn't seem like a whole lot. It looks like a bunch of burned brush and somewhere around Ukraine. This is actually around Bakhmut, and if you look closely, the bodies of at least 15 different Russian soldiers who conducted a wave-style full frontal assault against a Ukrainian machine gun position in a trench line are just littered in that field. It is quite literally a sea of bodies, and it is a horrific sight. It's not the first one we've seen. I saw at least 6 different Russian troops that were cut down inside of a small ditch laying in front of the machine gun earlier. It is just a brutal, gruesome scene, something that I never thought I would see in my lifetime, and I thought was something left to the history books of World War I. No, it is being replayed here in Ukraine every single day as we speak now. But something interesting happened as well, and that is the fact that there's a little bit of leader's recon. The head of the Ukrainian intelligence agency actually visited Bakhmut, and the OSINT community actually did a very interesting thing. They actually geolocated where he was at. He was within 600 meters of the front lines. The highest ranking intelligence official in the country of Ukraine was willing to go here and went within 600 meters of the Russian front line. The Russian propagandists and the Wagner group are absolutely outraged that they had no idea that the top intelligence official would be visiting the city. Once again, and they geolocated him. Booking 40 asked, what happened with the 4 soft killed behind enemy lines? Just bad luck? I've seen reports of that. I don't know how confirmed that is. I've seen just bits and pieces here and there. And keep in mind, we have sources. We have sources that we have gone through and we've taken a lot of time to vet and make sure they're actually reliable and they're giving, good information. So that way we're not just posting whatever is out there. So know for a fact we're not seeing everything, and nobody is going to see everything and know everything that's happening. Hell, no one on the battlefield knows everything going on. That's called the fog of war. We get it even worse than they do. But I have heard that 4 SOF personnel, Special Operations Forces from Ukraine, were killed behind enemy lines. And Bookham 40 asked, just bad luck? Yeah. So the thing about SOF is that they're not really meant for any kind of, they're not meant to be detected really. You're able to go, they have a very specific mission set. Soft units, generally speaking, are considered fragile. I don't know if you knew that, but the soft community, they are very good at their job. They're very good overall at everything. They know everything. They're very much masters in their craft. And they're very impressive to work with. And I highly, highly recommend, if you ever get the opportunity to work with Special Operations Forces, pay attention. Listen to them. They are very great instructors. They are very, very great at teaching you things and skills that, some of that stuff will actually stay with you for the rest of your life. Important mentalities and ideologies and things like that really make a difference in your effectiveness if you're in the military, or what have you, whatever you're doing, their effectiveness on the battlefield to have an impact. But soft units are, in their nature, considered to be fragile units. They are not an infantry battalion. They are not an armored battalion. They are not carrying a lot of support. They're not carrying a lot of anything. Their main asset is stealth. Their main asset is surprise, is that ability to remain hidden, to know their environment, and be able to deal with immediate small-scale situations. But if you're stuck behind enemy lines and you're discovered, you don't have a lot of firepower, you don't have a lot of armor, you don't have an easy way to get support to you or to get extracted. And it's very easy to see soft units become overrun and wiped out, unfortunately. It's bad luck, but there's always a risk involved no matter what action you're going to take. And operating behind enemy lines is a very high-risk thing to do with personnel. That's why you see UAVs and drones being used so often throughout this war to conduct reconnaissance, because doing it in person is inherently dangerous, and it leaves you inherently vulnerable to send out a small, lightly armed recon force, or to send out a special operations unit. And there's really no good way to give support to them should they be discovered. So it's bad luck. It's not the only thing you see where soft units are used and are wiped out, unfortunately. The Iraqi Golden Lions division, that would be special operations forces of the Iraqi army, which were trained by the U.S. Special Forces. The Golden Lions division is actually a very good military force. They are very impressive. They actually learned, these are the Iraqi forces that actually were willing to learn, gave a damn about their job, willing to learn their craft, and were the cream of the Iraqi forces. And they are very good at what they do. They're very feared, and because of that, they're very much a very top-rate special operations force for Iraq. They really are. And despite this, when they actually were the main unit for the push into Mosul, and that's where you see the fragility, how fragile special operations forces were, because they went into Mosul and they were taking casualty percentages that shouldn't be physically possible. Some units of the Golden Lions division actually took upwards of over 100% casualties, meaning every single person in the unit was either killed or wounded, and they were eventually replaced with more freshly trained Golden Lions guys who also were killed and wounded. Some of them upwards of 115% casualties, meaning the unit had been completely wiped out and then some. So they are inherently light. They're not meant for prolonged engagements. They're not meant for direct contact for long periods of time. And you see the casualties of that as a result. And yeah, so it happens. But it is what it is. Fair says, from what I saw, they unfortunately ended up dying to a mine. And so apparently it may not have been direct contact, which, once again, landmines are heavily used. So So it's a lot of, so it's very, yeah. I mean, a landmine is, once again, really bad luck. And Fair says this was confirmed by a popular Ukrainian regiment commander. Okay, so there is some kind of confirmation out there, I apparently see. So we jump down here to the south. This is in Abatin, or Optine, to the direct south of Bakhmut. And it says that the Wagner group actually ended up entering the city, the little town here of Optine, which is here on the southern flank of Bakhmut. We have seen the Wagner group specifically, but the Russian forces in general trying to encircle Bakhmut, trying to push around the key defenses of the city itself, and trying to outflank the troops there, and they've run into very bitter fighting. Now, Optine is still currently contested. We do know Ukrainian forces are there, and we've seen very brutal fighting over the last several weeks within and around this area. But so far, the Russians have pushed into it. Once again, however, it appears that they have stalled. Once again, the climate, that Rasputitsa mud, making it difficult to maneuver, and also heavy casualties and not enough supplies and support to really make any major offensive gains in any one area. So, very minor gain for the Russians, and we can see here, this is members of the Russian Wagner group here in Abatin.
В каждом таком здании, трехэтажки, пятиэтажки, двухэтажки, везде были оборудованы огневые точки противника. И ребятам приходилось отсюда с боем всех выбивать.
Looking forward, he says, Paul, I ask all my questions, generate a response from you. You know your stuff, and listening to you, I think, adds to the discussion. We learn a lot from you. When you go off, see Golden Lions. I appreciate that. I try to, but once again, even as an expert, you can still say wrong things. So I always implore that if you have an interest, or if I say something that may pique your interest, it's always worth doing your own research. And a lot of stuff is more available than you think. So if you ever have questions or anything, though, once again, you can see I will do my best to answer to the best of my ability, whatever that may be, and go from there. But I appreciate that you like my additions and when I go off. But here we can see this is Ukrainian forces, supposedly of the 53rd Mechanized Brigade, in and around Abatin as well. And you might notice something here. So you see a bunch of dudes and they're all kind of just standing in a line. And it probably doesn't make sense while the first half of them is walking. These other guys seem kind of hesitant. So there's a purpose for this kind of stuff, believe it or not. This is what you would call a ranger file. A ranger file, and I know Rob, who is joining us tonight, was in the Army, is just going, you know, yut and hoo-ah and all that fun stuff. But a ranger file is where you get into a straight line behind each other. Sometimes it's very close, sometimes it's not. Generally speaking, what you're trying to do is you're keeping 10 to 25 meters of distance between, sometimes upwards to 50 meters of distance between you and the person in front of you. So if the guy in front of you triggers a landmine, or they start taking contact or whatever, he hits an IED, if it blows up, he takes a grenade, you know, starts getting annihilated with a machine gun or something, there's a distance between you and him, so that way you're less likely to be wounded, you're less likely to be targeted, second, and you have a lot better reaction time. It's dispersion. And you'll see this sometimes. Another way to do it is in a staggered column. You'll see they'll take two columns on either side of the road, and they're kind of, they're going, the first guy's here, the second guy's here, he's further back, where they're kind of staggered like this, and then the next guy, and then the next guy, and the next guy. So that way there's still nice, good dispersion, but you can kind of group together a little bit better. It's great for, long patrols over relatively open terrain. There's different reasons to do different things. Sometimes you want closer dispersion, sometimes you don't. The danger of being closer is not just because you have is not just because sorry. Being closer it leads to more dangerous things, especially with explosives. But it allows you to be much more maneuverable, and it allows you to be much more quick to react in urban situations. But it also leads to, if you walk into a machine gun, you literally have given a machine gunner his wet dream, which is enfilade fire, meaning he has perfect fire clear down the line. He literally just has to pull the trigger, and and every single round is going to drop somebody else. Every single round is going to lay hate and discontent upon your enemy and is going to drop them. Enfilade fire is the wet dream of a machine gunner and that includes large groups of people clumped together running straight into a machine gun over open ground. Like right here, if there was a machine gun in this window right here, all of these guys would be dead. That's enfilade. Perfectly in line with your gun, essentially. And we jump down here, and we actually come down here into the city of Mariupol, where there's been several different developments. We can see here the drama theater has been demolished. This is something we touched on last time. And we take a look here. We can see where supposedly they've actually put guards up so you can't film it anymore. And that's the Mariupol Drama Theater. And I believe we may have already shown this before, but it's worth showing again, the destruction of the Mariupol Drama Theater. We can see here the rest of the city is also being demolished too. That work does continue. So you can just see the absolute they're quite literally covering up their war crimes. Essentially what's happening in Mariupol. Book of 40 asked what movie had the best infantry tactics. For me, it's Full Metal Jacket as they move up prior to the ambush. And second is Battle of Los Angeles. Battle of Los Angeles is interesting, but it's not very good tactics. There's some kind of impressively realistic things about it. For being the movie that it is. I'm not a big fan of the movie, personally. But Full Metal Jacket, I find the second half of the movie to be it's realistic in some ways, but it's not, that's not the point. The point of the movie isn't necessarily to be 100% as realistic as physically possible. It's supposed to give a documentary feel. That's not what it is. It's meant to convey a message about the inhuman things of war, essentially. And there's a whole in-depth thing. Kubrick is just a very interesting character anyway. But the first half of the movies can be very realistic in how boot camp was. And that's thanks almost entirely to R. Lee Ermey. Fantastic individual, fantastic actor. 13 hours. Nope, not 13 hours. 13 hours is not the best, I don't think. If you really want a taste of the humor and the humor, the tactics, the kind of feelings of 21st century kind of modern warfare feeling, it's not truly a movie. It is a miniseries. It was made by HBO, and it is called Generation Kill. And if you've never seen Generation Kill, that is the best movie. It flopped compared to The Pacific and Band of Brothers because it was too good. The only audience that really gets it is anyone that was in the military or grew up around that kind of stuff, so they understand the lingo, the ins and the outs. I find it hilarious. I think it's very accurate. The humor is there. It definitely represents, post 9/11 veterans, I think, very well in true form. So definitely Generation Kill, I would say. Infantry tactic wise, they don't touch on it a lot, but it definitely is there. It is very good. It's very well done. I will say that. Another one I recommend if you're looking at just the tactical side of it, and also a very good movie. There's some of it. It's definitely Hollywooded, but a very good movie nonetheless. Is Black Hawk Down is a very good movie. One of my favorites, has one of my favorite soundtracks of any movie as well. Hans Zimmer did an amazing job on that. But I think Black Hawk Down is very impressive, and for the gritty brutality of war and the blood and the gore and the guts and all of that not so fun stuff, definitely I would say the opening scene to Saving Private Ryan tops it all. It's really hard, but my favorite 3 series ever is Generation Kill. Top 3 series ever made, top 3 movies, whatever have you, for me ever made, is definitely going to be Generation Kill, The Pacific, and Band of Brothers. Ed Kelly, welcome, says, any proof that Ukrainians are using the HIMARS M38-1 tungsten weapons? So I wasn't an artilleryman, but I have been around HIMARS. There is some proof. We have seen some proof of the tungsten pellets from HIMARS rounds being used, because we've seen where they have punched through armor. So we've seen where the Russians have actually filmed strikes reportedly from HIMARS punching through armor and the little pellets of tungsten being all over the place. So there is some proof. We can generally say that the Ukrainians are using certain HIMARS munitions that include tungsten. I don't know specific HIMARS rounds, so I apologize. That was not my field in the craft. I was an anti-tank missileman, so I dealt with tow missiles and anti-armor weapons. Javelins is my favorite. It's my all-time favorite weapon system. Don't get me wrong, the tow is nice too, but I was around HIMARS, but I don't have any familiarity with it, other than some basic capabilities of it. So I apologize. I don't know what specific rounds they would have, but I do know that there's been talk that those tungsten pellets from several HIMARS rounds are popping up in Ukraine, telling us that they have them. But the ATACMS, we don't see being used in Ukraine. So I apologize if that doesn't quite answer your question, but I also don't want to tell you something wrong. I want to be as truthful as possible, and I'm just not knowledgeable enough to tell you that. So we saw this earlier here in Mariupol. There was a very famous mural on an apartment building of a little girl, and the Russians painted over that. It wasn't enough for them. They painted "From people of St. Petersburg to Mariupol" on it, and so they're not just morally bankrupt, apparently, but also very much creatively. Anything they can think of for murals right now is Russian flags, Z's and V's. So that is the mural there in Mariupol, and they painted over it, and this is what they replaced it with. Jumping over here, another collaborant bites the dust. The car of the appointed head of Lubomivka, Andrei Sherpa, was blown up on December the 22nd here in the Kherson Oblast. And you see there the destruction of the vehicle. And that is the individual who was eliminated. City of Kherson, however, has many of the big talking points of the night when it comes to the country of Ukraine. And we can see here, this is a Russian Christmas, is really what it boils down to. So Russian forces not only rejected even the remote possibility of a ceasefire over Christmas, but instead appear to have intensified their shelling in many parts of Ukraine. We're talking about Kharkiv. We know received shelling, but we couldn't find any evidence from sources. We just know that it received it, but nothing photographic. Many other cities, of course, across the front line, as we've already talked about. And, of course, Kherson, which was shelled on December the 24th, or Christmas Eve alone. This killed 8 people and injured an additional 55. Alexei Reznikov posting some of the more censored photos from this incident. Amin Dzepper, the first deputy of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Ukraine, posted much more graphic versions of those photos. We have left that 18 plus and will not be showing that here. Later that very same night, as children should be in bed waiting for Santa Claus to show up and leave presents under the tree, instead they were met with incendiary munitions.
Со свистом что-то разлетается прямо над нами, прикинь. А шумит как дождь. А я снимаю.
By the way, these are all war crimes. We can go through it pretty quick. So the shelling of Kherson alone violates the 1949 Geneva Conventions, but it also violates Additional Protocol 1 of the 1949 Geneva Conventions, adopted in 1977, meaning that indiscriminate fires against civilian populations, civilian infrastructure, and high concentrations thereof, the planning of doing so, and also firing or actually carrying out that objective without attempting to minimize collateral damage is therefore a war crime under the 1949 Geneva Convention. And secondly, It also violates, with the incendiary munitions, not only are they using it indiscriminately, which violates Additional Protocol 1 of the 1949 Geneva Conventions, it also violates customary humanitarian law, rule number 85, as we've already previously discussed with Bakhmut, but also Additional Protocol 3 of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons adopted in 1980, with the Additional Protocol being adopted in 1983. So, war crimes for Christmas. That is what it really boils down. That is the Russian Christmas, is war crimes. It is war crimes. Fair says, never realized it sounds like rain and it makes that whipping sound. That whipping sound is not the shell itself. Well, it is. It's not the munitions. You will hear this and I wish I had a better video to show you, because I have one of this I took myself of us firing flare rounds on deployment. The mortar teams were dropping flares, and when the canister pops for the flares, they make the rest of that, casing that these were all in is flying through the air. It's now hollow, and that's what makes the whipping sound. It's a very distinct sound. It's it's something that has always kind of stuck with me. It's how I knew. On top of the fact that it's very easy to spot a flare, lighting up, several hundred meters to a grid square. But it's how you can, it's audibly how you can hear that there's a flare round that is going off. So that very distinct whipping sound, that sound feels like you're taking a hollow plastic tube and kind of throwing it around in the air, kind of, whipping it around you in the air. It's the same kind of idea.
Со свистом что-то разлетает.
That sound is literally the empty casing flying through the air. The next day, however, was a very interesting. It was a very immense sign of perseverance, and it came from, of course, on Christmas. After all of these events had happened, the next day the hospitals were full of people trying to donate blood. And I do mean they were full of people trying to donate blood. This is wartime Christmas in Ukraine. But the Russians didn't stop, because on the 27th, their indiscriminate artillery bombardments struck a protected zone. Specifically, it struck the Kherson Maternity Hospital. Not the first time we've seen the Russians strike a hospital, and not the first time we've seen them hit a maternity hospital. Caused severe damage to several of the wings there, and we can see here, including newborn children, 2 days old, day old, in some cases here, were actually inside at the time of the shelling. You see the damage on the inside of the maternity ward. You can see where the wall's been punched out. You can see where the shrapnel has busted through the door. Complete collapse of one of the wings. Coming from Amin Dzabar. From the National Police of Ukraine, once again verifying the information. They also stated that several residences were also struck. Anton Gerashenko posted this video. This is from a woman who said that she was actually in there. She gave birth on Christmas, and 2 days later, the Russians ended up striking the maternity ward where she was staying, her 2-day-old son. And in her own words, she says he's already had his second birthday, and he's only been alive for 2 days.
страшно. Было очень
А
страшно.
Максимку давно народився?
25-го на праздник. Так что у нас было вот вчера второе крещение, второй день рождения. Ничего, было тихо, спокойно как-то. Вечерить собирались, уже дитя начало кормить. А тут резкий взрыв, начали стекла сыпаться, окна, паника. Вот. То, что видела, то хватало перед себя. То есть ребенка, одеяло и бегом в коридор. Врачи собрались, начали собирать всех мамочек нас. Вот. Взрывы не прекращались, в принципе, ни на минуту. Окна в коридоре все вылетали абсолютно. Вот. Проводка горела. Вот. Вывели нас в подвал. Вот. Врачи молодцы, не растерялись, то есть не давали нам растеряться. Вот. Мы сидели сперва в подвале, потом нас перевели уже где-то к 7 часам, когда немножко более-менее утихло, в другое здание. Вот. Там тоже взрывы тоже были, ну, по крайней мере, хотя бы окна целые.
Pretty crazy to think about. But once again, a war crime. And a bomb, an absolutely horrific one. We're not sure of the casualties from this strike on the 27th. The Seth from Melt asks how likely Putin will be prosecuted, or will it be pushed on expendable brass? You have a couple of questions in there, and the first question is, will he be prosecuted? That's a really big question in and of itself. And how, without invading a country and occupying it and forcefully seizing individuals in power, how do you prosecute war crimes? How do you do it? And that is the question. And, because it is very unlikely that Putin will be willing to give himself up, because he will be facing life imprisonment, if not the death, if not the death sentence, if deemed horrific enough that they reinstitute that at The Hague. Will be pushed off on expendable brass. It's not pushed off onto them. They are also war criminals. Anyone, every person, from the guy who fires the round, to the guy who gave the order, to the guy that gave the order above him, everyone who commits a war crime, their entire chain of command is liable. When it is, when you're looking at the chain of command, you cannot say that it's not like a squad. The Haditha massacre that occurred in Iraq. A squad of Marines went through and massacred over 20 Iraqi civilians because one of their squad mates hit an IED and was killed. You can say that those in charge of the squad, those in charge of the squad and the people that perpetrated it in that squad are liable, but their platoon commander, the company CEO, while may have been relieved of duty, weren't involved in that. It wasn't ordered. And that is true. We know where that line stops, because we can tell it was one squad of guys, of Marines, that they did it because a squad mate was killed. And they were operating in the area, and it was on their own will. It wasn't something that was ordered. Throughout Ukraine, this scorched earth policy is all, it's systematic. Which is why it's a crime against humanity, according to the 1993 Rome Statute. It's systematic. It's being done by... And these strikes, these are artillery batteries. These are being ordered. And the Russian military isn't small unit leadership focused. It is very much officer heavy. So the ranks go up significantly higher than they normally would if you're looking at prosecution of war crimes in the United States. Because there's a lot I had 3 guys underneath me as a corporal in the Marine Corps. I had 3 guys in my team. I had myself, I had another I had an A/, and I had, or AK, I had another gunner, and then A gunners. I had 3 guys in the Javelin team. And that's as a corporal. Russia doesn't have that. It goes straight platoon commander, everybody else. Platoon commander, the 40 guys underneath them. There's not really any sergeants or corporals or non-commissioned officers. It's very top heavy. It's a very top heavy structure. It's very officer focused. And these officers, these junior officers, are carrying out orders to a T that they're receiving from their company commanders, who are receiving them from their battalion commanders, who are receiving them from their regimental commanders, who are receiving them from their BTG commanders, who are receiving them from the divisional commanders, who are receiving them from Moscow, ultimately, right? So it's very top-heavy, and the Russian doctrine really doesn't allow for much deviation. The Russian military mindset doesn't allow for much deviation or to a complete objective. So this is why we see this is the failure of the Russian military, but it is also to their detriment when it comes to war crimes tribunals, because you know that those orders are being carried out as they were directed. So you can go much, much higher in war crimes tribunals. Now, I am not an expert in international criminal law, but you have to understand what you can and can't do in warfare. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't last very long in prison. I really didn't want to commit any war crimes while I was there. Not just because I wouldn't last very long in prison, because I'm also trying not to be a horrendous human being. And by the laws of war, you are not allowed to follow an unlawful order. And doing so means that you are also a war criminal. So there is nobody under any international law, there is nobody who can say, I was just following orders. I was just following orders is not an excuse. So there is no Russian who can say, yes, I murdered these people. I was following orders. You are still a war criminal under international law. You will be tried as such. And you may be put in prison for life. You may be executed. The international community defines war crimes and punishments, but it's not so clear on how to stop it. A vote in the UN doesn't work. That's coming from Richard W. Yes, you are correct. But that is not entirely true. The United Nations has teeth. It just refuses to use it. Let's see if I can pull this up. UN Charter Article 42. I believe it's Article 42. So Article 41 is being implemented now. I'm reading this up for you guys. Oh, here, I'm messing this thing up. I'm bringing this up for y'all. So this is the legal, this is coming from the United Nations website. And Article 41 states, quote, the Security Council may decide what measures not involving the use of armed forces are to be employed to give effect to its decisions, and it may call upon the members of the United Nations to apply such measures. These may include complete or partial interruption of economic relations and of rail, sea, air, postal, telegraphic, radio, and other means of communications, and the severance of diplomatic relations. That is what we are seeing implemented now by the United Nations. But it doesn't stop there. This is what you're seeing from the international community now. This is the talk. This is the rhetoric of, we condemn this war. We absolutely condemn this unprovoked invasion of Ukraine in this war, in this Putin's war of aggression. I'm pretty much exactly quoting everything stated by any of the major players in the United Nations in any of their addresses over the last 10 months. I'm sure if you take this and you actually look it up, I'm sure it's been said almost word for word. Guaranteed. It gets tiring. We hate hearing it. I really don't know why they haven't just moved on. But Article 41 is essentially what you're seeing being done. And with the special, with that special allowance now, should the United Nations Security Council no longer be able to use its authority due to a veto, it can be overridden by an emergency session of the General Assembly. Which could lead to this, and that is Article 42, which is the teeth. Article 42 of the UN Charter states, quote, should the Security Council consider that measures provided for in Article 41 would be inadequate or have proved to be inadequate, it may take such action by air, sea, or land forces as may be necessary to maintain or restore international peace and security. Such actions may include demonstrations, blockade, or other operations by air, sea, and land forces of members of the United Nations. Meaning Article 42 allows for the United Nations to use force should other means not work, such as sanctions or whatever else. The United Nations, under Article 42, Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, has the ability to use military force to not just maintain but to restore international peace. And we can see supplements which have been added in multiple volumes starting in 1954 or 1945 and 1950 through 1954, all the way on clear up until 2009 having been added to that. So it comes in two parts. You're seeing Article 41 being implemented now. And that takes time. And something that Richard W. says it was that sanctions are slow. And you're correct. But to say that the United Nations has no teeth is to be wrong. The United Nations has teeth, but it refuses to use it. We can see here, this is something that we have touched on before, and this is actually coming from Sky News, which is, I normally try to shy away from it, but it's something that we've seen before. And we can see stolen children. Orphanage director recalls Russian occupation and how brave locals saved orphans by hiding them amongst their own families. Many kids, regardless, were stolen reportedly by Russian occupational forces. Fair is that the article that triggered the Kosovo intervention? That is. So the Article 42 has actually been used. Pretty much Article 42 is what you fall back on anytime you're looking at a UN armed peacekeeping mission anywhere. So UN peacekeeping mission to former Yugoslavia, the interventions between the civil war, or between the wars between Bosnia and Herzegovina under the 1949 convention, in order to prevent ethnic cleansing and genocide and protection of civilian life. You're seeing that was the exact same article that would have been used for Korea, essentially. You're looking at the Korean War being a police action, a UN police action. Vietnam was also considered to be a police action. There were multiple countries involved in that. It was not just the United States who was the predominant one. But yes, there is a lot of... there's a lot of instances, MINUSMA right now in Africa. So that is essentially how you can look at that. But yes, it has been enacted before. Soft for Melt says need to kick Russia off the Security Council or amend so that the Security Council members void Security Council privileges such as vetoes, such as invading a nation. That is actually in the UN Charter already. Russia technically should not be able to veto as a member of the United Nations because they are a combatant in the ongoing war and therefore should not be participating in any and should be abstaining to all different instances within the UN Security Council. Which is also why you see the United States in some cases in conflicts in which they are party to, at which the United Nations or in which they have abstained in certain results and rulings because they were parties to the conflict, not necessarily because they were trying to show anything. Tim Epp says U.S. came to save France and Vietnam. The United States was unsuccessful to save France. Decolonization happened long before major U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Was there U.S. involvement? Yes. Was not successful, though. That's why Vietnam was already two countries when we supported Southern Vietnam, because the Soviet Union and Soviet China, or I say Soviet China, Communist China, were supporting Ho Chi Minh. We jump up here, but sorry, that is all that is everything inside of the country of Ukraine for tonight, but that's not everything that's happening in the news. There's plenty of other stuff happening throughout the world as well, and we can actually continue with the theme of the war in Ukraine tonight as we move up into the country of Belarus, where we get a little bit of a chuckle here. This is the Belarusian armed forces demonstrating their skills in a mall. I'm just going to point this out now. I don't think you're supposed to wear your running sneakers. You're supposed to have combat boots to start that. Secondly, can someone please explain the tactical importance of doing a front flip in military kit? Can anyone ever explain to me the importance of doing this? What does any of this have to do? Why would you ever need to do this? Is that my local airsoft team? Yes. This is the mighty Belarusian military, my friends. This is the Belarusians. This is the Lukashenko regime at its finest, and this, I wouldn't say at its finest. We have shown better here on the channel, but that is the propaganda that they're using. There's no way I could watch that in person, and there's no way I could keep a straight face. There's no way. I'd be like, we are so dead. Like, if a war ever breaks out, we are all going to die. We're going to get steamrolled. Rooster Fontaine says, front flip equals dodging bullets Matrix style. Fair says, reminds me of the scene in Indiana Jones of a guy slinging a sword before he gets shot. Yeah, pretty much. Believe it or not, I know it's hard to imagine, but the KISS method is amazing. KISS is KISS standing for keep it simple, stupid. That's yeah. distractions to the real assault team can sneak around back. I don't think they have a real assault. We've seen the majority of the Belarusian military at this point, and none of them have impressed me. Does the party in exile have any way to come back to power there? That's a really good question. I don't think so, because most of them are currently being political prisoners inside of Russia and Belarus. They're not really in exile. They're more or less political prisoners now. But now that allows us to move on into Russia, and boy, is it interesting. So, something that you may not know about me is I am a huge, huge fan of J.R.R. Tolkien. Or Tolkien, if you're saying it properly. But J.R.R. Tolkien, for those that don't know, wrote The Hobbit. He also wrote The Lord of the Rings, but he was also a legitimate badass. It was based on his stories of his travels throughout Europe and throughout the world, and also during his time in World War I. He was actually a British doughboy in World War I, and he actually fought at the Battle of the Somme, which is one of the bloodiest battles of the British Army in history, with over 100,000 casualties in the very first 24 hours of fighting. It's huge, but he's a fantastic writer. He invented entire languages. He actually wrote for the Webster Dictionary, the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. He actually wrote it. That's why dwarf and dwarves is actually a word now. Tolkien invented the word dwarves. It used to be dwarfs prior to that, and his publisher tried to correct him, and he said, I wrote the dictionary. I know how to spell it. In which case they printed his books. But I am a huge fan of his work, and I thought it very ironic when somebody posted this, when specifically our lead researcher Fair posted this. 9 rings for men doomed to die. So the very opening of the Lord of the Rings talks about the ring of power and the rings of power that were provided. And the last 9 provided were given to the race of men, which are specifically, they're mortal, they're doomed to die, and it keeps... Ring of Power was better than Lord of the Rings? No. No. But it's very... but... Anyway, it keeps them alive forever, and they turn into Nazgul and all of that fun stuff. But anyway, it said that it's important not to draw parallels with Putin's latest PR stunt in St. Petersburg, where he held a summit for friendly states. He made 9 custom gold rings for each leader of the summit, including himself. If that doesn't sound like Lord of the Rings, I don't know what does. Whoever book them, you're wrong. Peter Jackson's work will go down in history as being the top line of Tolkien movie done. You've never seen the extended box set of Lord of the Rings, have you? It comes on 2 discs per movie. I have it. It's long. It's a valuable week of my time that I will watch over and over again. Anyway, as we continue with the actual news story here, the 9 countries were Russia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. Only Lukashenko was seen wearing his ring, while other leaders abstained. It's important to note that most of the leaders who attended were Muslim, and wearing gold jewelry is against their religion. Short-sighted idea or done purposely? That is the question. Later, Peskov asked not to compare the rings presented at the CIS summit with rings from the Lord of the Rings. They had to publicly address this. Bookham is still trying to fight me on this. I'm sorry, Bookham. I literally fell asleep. It was so awful I could not watch it. I have read every book Tolkien has ever written, and what they have made is absolutely horrendous. Everything newer lost its magic, too cartoony, trying too hard to be likable. These don't even look comfortable. They probably aren't comfortable. But you can't even live in your own home in Russia, so it's okay. RT has wished the rest of Europe a Happy New Year. This ad is being aired daily on Russian television.
Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright, from yon virgin mother and child, holy infant, so tender and mild, sleep in heavenly peace, sleep in heavenly peace.
Apparently, that is what Russia thinks is happening in the rest of Europe. Now, I happen to have a lot of friends in Europe, around the world. In fact, a lot of different people in Europe work on the team. People from Poland, people from Ukraine, and many viewers as well. Barbara, who comes on here when she's capable of making it live from the UK, as always jumping in, always leaving a comment even when she can't. That is what they think of what is happening in Europe. A country which many parts doesn't have running water, doesn't have plumbing, doesn't have electricity. There are alternatives to Russia. I am very warm, actually. I'm very warm. I'm very warm and comfy here in the United States. I have no worries about eating my 2 cats or my lovely and adorable dog. And I know of nobody in Europe that is in the same boat. Sci-Fi likes to point out here, or wanted to point out, Russian propaganda for Russians, not for us. That is correct. They are in essentially what can only be described now as an echo chamber. They are yelling at nobody but them. They are an empty room. They are standing in the center of an empty room, and they are screaming at themselves, essentially. And they're hearing their own echo off of the walls, as there is no one else around to hear them. Oh no! Again? 2 more mysterious deaths in a day, Alexei Maslov, ex-commander of ground forces of the Russian army, died this week. Also, Alexander Abuzakov, general director of the Admiralty shipyards where submarines carrying Caliber missiles are assembled. Buzakov was at the launch of a new submarine just the day before his mysterious death. Talking about suppression, this is the brutal suppression. This is an elderly woman in Russia who is criticizing the war. See if we can. No, I guess we're not.
Вот телевизор, великая сила. А я не 2 раза в жизни там была в молодости. Я не имею отношения, мне даже знакомых там нет. Так ничего страшного, вы поедете, помогите. Вы поедете, вот куда вы суете, которые в галошах пошли воевать. В резиновых сапогах и танки, тупоредки, все разворовано. Российские танки на тупоредках. Нет, и в резиновых, нет, это тоже вопрос. Я говорю, империя, это империя такая, на тупоредках. За меня не собираются.
Yep. Definitely. Yep. And there's a reason. So, if you may remember, the Ukrainian authorities were really cracking down on the church, and specifically the Orthodox Church inside of Ukraine, because of their connections with the Russian Orthodox Church. And a lot of people were kind of in an uproar about that. Why are you attacking, our religious group? Religious, religions are supposed to be protected and are protected under humanitarian law against persecution. There's actually a real point for them to do that. That has nothing to do with anyone being Orthodox. It's not about your religious belief. It's about what it's being used to do and the political implications behind that. Ukraine and the Russian Orthodox Church, being of very similar religion, are different sects of the same religion, different denominations. Work very closely in many ways prior to the war, and we can see those ties were used for a reason. This is the Russian Orthodox Church. This is what they are saying, and this is what they were finding inside of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. This is the exact same stuff that was being pushed in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in cooperation with the Russian Orthodox Church. So that is the reason for the crackdown. This is in Russia. Take a look.
Воинская смерть лучше всех смертей. Это лучшая смерть из смертей. Люди умирают, как свиньи, захлебываются блевотиной, скажу я вам. Еле-еле пили, перепили, под столы попадали, обрыгались, и блевотиной захлебнулись. Вот тебе и смерть. А потом малолетки-зацеперы поехали зацепиться за электричку покататься, его током шваркнуло 3000 вольт, и он обугленный на рельсы упал, а ему лет было 17. Пошли фотку сделать, селфи какую-нибудь на крышу дома. Подскользнулись и полетели с 15 этажа вместе с телефоном. Сделали селфи. Таких дурацких смертей, Так лучше с оружием в руках умереть за Родину. Как герой, как мужчина. Еще помолиться перед смертью, сказать: Господи, помилуй, и пошел. Воинская смерть лучше всех смертей.
The church, who's headed by a former KGB agent, by the way, is literally being used to politically push the war. They're being used to support through religion a war. Wouldn't be the first time. According to the Bible, which I'm sure the Russian Orthodox Church is probably overlooking, or the Bible itself, thou shalt not kill, first commandment. You know, but also, then again, I guess they are covered in one way, and that's because in Exodus it does state that the Lord is a man of war. And we can see some instant karma apparently happens here. A giant icicle ended up falling on Lieutenant General of the Ministry of Emergencies, Anatoly Elizarov, Director of the Department of Operational Management of the Ministry of Emergencies of Russia. He is in serious condition with a head injury. And we have video. A nice good bonk. A lot of people saying warrior death, insanity. But these are things that are happening. This is what's being said. You know, this is stuff that people are believing. In the Kursk Oblast, we saw a large column of Russian tanks which were spotted near Lvov. Here in the Kursk Oblast, a very large column of T-72s that are heading. We're seeing a lot of activity along the border regions, both in Belarus and in Russia. While it's unsure at this point, it's unknown if they're going to be capable or willing to relaunch an invasion in the north. It definitely looks like they're at least forcing for Ukrainian troops to have to stay out of the engagements in the south and the Donbass in order to provide additional security, as there appears to be military buildups along their northern border. I saw someone asking earlier, and I figured you probably might too. I've seen people asking, what are these plates here? Those are a type of, it's called NERA. ERA is the little explosive blocks you see on a lot of tanks, and these even have some, I believe. We take a look. These little blocks here on the front of the tank, these are explosive. They're a shaped charge, and when an explosive charge hits them, they explode up and out and away from the tank, leaving the armor with essentially no damage on it. They're designed to do that. These are actually additional steel plates. These are originally designed for the T90 and the T80. They have mounting brackets on those specifically for these designs. This is a T80 bracket, is what they're actually using here. And you can see because of the staggered design. Or sorry, it's T90 bracket because of the staggered design. T80 has a straight design on it. These are just additional armor plating. They're a type of non-explosive reactive armor. So they just are meant there to provide additional armor plating along the side skirt here, especially in the forward part of the compartment, because that's where a lot of the ready ammunition is actually stored. Book of 40 says, unless it's Russian, then they are getting rubber plates. Rubber plates are actually the main component of a non-explosive reactive armor. Those ones are the steel plates. We know those are the steel plates. They don't have the rubber plate makeup. The rubber plates you're talking about, they look like explosive reactive armor. The reason why that they're rubber, it actually is, it has a purpose. They were designed with that in mind. The rubber plates, you are between two pieces of steel, additional pieces of steel. The bottom part of the steel actually mounts onto the tank on different mounting points. And then the main charge, when it hits that first plate, it's going to punch through that first plate. But all of that rubber and everything, it's going to burn away. But that ends up, the point of it is it's meant to burn away. It's meant to absorb most of the of the molten jet of metal that's fired from that shape charge, so that way it doesn't actually puncture the main armor of the tank and leaves it relatively intact. So not really effective. They haven't been effective for a long time. They're better against single charge warheads. Tandem charge warheads essentially will defeat any type of armor that you put onto a vehicle, unless you're talking about if the Russians actually provided the Arena cast system, which is the Arena close and air defense system, or if you're looking at the trophy system, which is essentially the same thing but for NATO vehicles, where it actually intercepts incoming projectiles. So unless you have those, there's no real way to beat tandem charge warheads. ERA, NERA, XRA, which is actually a developmental type of reactive armor. Energetic reactive armor is what it stands for. Electrified, energetic, energy of reactive armor. Uses electricity to destroy the incoming warhead. Those are more or less meant for single charge warheads like the RPG-7 or the RPG-7 rockets, 84 millimeter rockets, fired by the M3 Carl Gustav or the AT-4 or the M72 rockets or stuff like that. Tandem charge warheads really don't have anything you can defeat because it's hard enough to beat one explosive projectile, let alone two. Without getting into too much detail there. And Saratov, we jump over here to Engels. This is Engels Air Base, which was blown up by the Ukrainians again. Ukrainian UAV ended up striking Engels Air Base, which is home to the Russian Tu-160 and Tu-95 strategic bombers. Tu-95 is a four-engine prop strategic bomber. Think the B-29, but for the Russians and still in service, surprisingly enough. These were their original nuclear-capable bombers. Right now, these systems are being used to launch the KH-101 missiles, which are long-range ballistic and cruise missiles, which are being fired at Ukraine. So these are meant to, these attacks are meant to destroy or damage some of these aircraft. And you can see these are the Tu-160s. The Tu-160 is very similar to that of the B-1 Lancer, which is used by the United States. And actually, to give you an idea, so that's the Tu-160, and then we'll go to Guam. Thank you. And so you got to see a Tu-160, and then if we go over here to Guam, that is a B-1 Lancer for comparison. One of our strategic bombers. This is the U.S. Air Force strategic bomber there in Guam, where they're based. Going back to Engels, you can see these are the Tu-95s. These are four-engine prop aircraft, strategic bombers. These are the same things that have been used really since the end of World War II. Do they have a C-1? No, that's an Antonov. You can see they also have Antonov transport aircraft there. I almost thought that was a C-130, but they always have equivalents to many things. And Book and 40 says, I heard that they were redeployed to Siberia. There's several different things coming out, but unfortunately we can't confirm a lot, and there's a large amount of suppression. And we see that though the Russian media is denying any damage or fatalities, right now the rumors have it that 17 people were killed, 50 were injured during the attack. They can't confirm or deny those rumors, but a funeral was held in Engels today for at least 3 men who served at the base. So we do know that they are in fact having funerals for guys who supposedly weren't killed in a drone strike. Now, reportedly, the target of the drone strike was to hit a administration's building and the barracks building for the pilots and crew chiefs of these aircraft. So that is kind of what we're looking at now. But not a lot of information. All we know is it happened. Take a look. We can see here the funeral for at least 3 of those men who were not killed during the attack on Ingalls Air Base. So, very interesting indeed. Down here, this is coming out of Novocherkassk in the Rostov Oblast. A military barracks reportedly belonging to the 150th Russian Division reportedly caught fire, and it's not reported as to what the cause nor any casualties as a result of the blaze. We can continue the insanity as we move eastward here in Russia, where a fire in an illegal nursing home killed 22 people. According to the emergency services, the establishment had been identified at the end of 2021 by authorities and was due to undergo an unannounced inspection in 2023. Russian nursing homes are notorious for their lack of funding, maintenance, and horrid living conditions. This is one of many fires that have killed hundreds. And in Russia's most oil-rich yet poorest regions, isn't that crazy to think about? The most oil-rich part of Russia is the most poor part of Russia, is celebrating the new year by showing off its statue that was aired nationally on television across Russia, made of dung. It's made of poo. The Russians were so proud that they made a giant bunny for New Year's out of poo, that they aired it on national TV. Yes. Booking 40 asked, how is Russia so effed up? Plenty of money. Is corruption that bad? Corruption is horrendous. So, I'll give you an idea. So, the Russians had supposedly in stock 1.5 million winter coats made for their military that they have no idea where they're at. They have no idea. They have literally said that rats and moths ate 1.5 million pairs of winter clothes for troops in the Russian military. We saw videos of where Russian troops were being issued explosives that were blocks of wood wrapped in the explosive papers. Their AKs are rusted shut. They're using T-62s on the battlefield. So Russia has one. It's an autocratic society. It's not really democracy. It pretended to be a democracy for a little bit, and then immediately Putin came to power, or attempted. Russia, following the collapse of the Soviet Union. So in the Soviet Union, you had the party. You had the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the Bolsheviks, and usually everything is state-run under a communist government. Everything is state-run. It's how it's supposed to be. It's all taken care of. Everything is organized and is run by the state. And because the state knows best what's good for you. And the states, when the Soviet Union collapsed, underwent a lot of changes. First of all, they immediately, quite literally, collapsed in every way, shape, or form. But likely were able to pull themselves back together. But the first thing that happens is the industry goes from being government-controlled to privatized. But who gets all of the brand new private government, former government stuff? Members of the former government who were very high up in the USSR, very high-ranking government officials, now suddenly become owners of multi-million, billion-dollar corporations that are formed out of former government-owned companies. These individuals become the first oligarchs. Already corruption is rampant inside of the former Soviet Union, selling off massive quantities of military equipment to basically fund every war that has happened since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Massive amounts of stockpiles, lots of infighting, but corruption is horrendous. Everyone's trying to look out for their own best interest. And the government now, they under Boris Yeltsin and under the interim government that attempted to be a democracy, found out democracy was really hard, and right after your entire country collapses, the Russians found out that usually that's not a good thing. And it's considered, Boris Yeltsin was also not a very good president, I would say, but in general, they didn't do very well. It was a very tough time for Russia, and it was not very good economically, politically. It was just not a good period in Russian history, the transition. And then Putin comes to power and essentially redoes or completely changes Russian society and Russian position on the world stage through quite a few nefarious means, but he does it, which is why he's looked up to in almost like a godlike fashion in Russia. But the oligarchies didn't go away. Those that just got worse. Their pockets only deepened. They all knew each other from being in the Soviet Party. They all knew each other from being, high-ranking communist officials in the Communist Party. And it just gets, so they know who needs to get in with who. And so everyone is just trying to line their pockets. But keep a running government. Because they don't get to line their pockets anymore if their government fails. So, the State Duma was to make it look like that they have a democracy, that they are a changed nation, but truly everyone's in the pocket of Putin. He holds all the power, he holds all the cards inside of Russia. So, and we see what happens with political prisoners of Russia. They literally get poisoned, sometimes in broad daylight, by KGB agents in other countries. So it's not good. But yes, it's that bad. It is that bad. They don't take care of anybody. And another reason why it's pretty messed up, and the saddest thing about the war in Ukraine, is the fact that either way you look at it, Russia wins. Not the war itself. If Russia wins in Ukraine, they succeed in committing genocide against the Ukrainian people based off of nationality, according to the 1949 Geneva Conventions. Based off of what we've seen, they're committing genocide against them, and they will be successful if they win the war. If Ukraine wins the war, they remain a sovereign state. But the highest conscription numbers aren't in Moscow or St. Petersburg. Those people are what you call Muscovites. These are white Russians from Eastern Europe, but the western side of Russia. They are Russian Orthodox, white, Christian, Russian-speaking people. Generally speaking, lived in Moscow and St. Petersburg, meaning that they, generally speaking, already had better connections, their family-wise, in the Communist Party. They already had better living standards. These are the people that are better educated, and these are the people that have the modern amenities that Russia likes to throw around and talk about, oh, we are a modern country. We have completely rebuilt and reshaped ourselves. Where do they show? They show Smolensk. They show Kursk. They show, they show Moscow and St. Petersburg. They don't show you, let's find tiny village Keta. Tiny village Keta doesn't even have a damn road in the whole town. The whole town. They live in huts on the river in northern Siberia. And these people over here, these people are a minority. They're Asian. Dagestan, Chechnya. They're Muslim minorities. They're not really white. They're not Christian. They're not Russian speaking. And these are the places with the highest conscription numbers. So if Russia wins the war in Ukraine, they commit genocide against Ukrainians. But if they lose the war in Ukraine, they have successfully ethnically cleansed the regions that they deem as second-class citizens. If you look at Russian Soviet hierarchy of first and second and third and fourth class republics within the Soviet Union, you see that discrimination in just the hierarchy of the Soviet Union, let alone the mindset that was created as the Russians at the immediate collapse of the Soviets. And you don't have to look anywhere else either. You don't have to just look at Russia itself. Look at former Soviet countries that fell in line or fall in line with the Russian policy. Kazakhstan has had popular uprisings brutally suppressed. Chechnya, brutal uprising, insurgency, brutally suppressed by the Russians. Serbia committed ethnic at the breakup of the former Yugoslavia, committed ethnic cleansing against Bosnians and Herzegovinians. It's the mentality of seeing everyone else as second class. So that's why it's so effed up. We move on with the rest of Europe. We jump over here into Poland. More equipment was spotted here in Poland. This is U.S. military equipment spotted on railways here in Poland. And it's mostly logistical equipment. The Humvees, the trailers, logistical trucks, and towable generators. Which all of this stuff is stuff that fits the needs, specifically the specific needs of Ukrainian forces and what they have been asking for, and the security assistance that has been said that they would be getting, and we're starting to see some of that in Poland itself. So it's kind of cool. We don't really get this look very often. We normally don't get to see it until it gets to Ukraine itself, but we can see here in Poland this equipment on the move. Take a look. Pretty fantastic to see that they're getting more stuff, or that they are supposedly going to be getting more stuff. And something that's really invaluable, I think, are these right here. I talked a little bit before. Desert Tan is so 2010. Man, no. But these medical trucks right here are absolutely invaluable. The terrain is extremely rough, and the Humvee is really good as a vehicle. Now, it has a lot of drawbacks, don't get me wrong. And Humvees aren't necessarily the most comfortable things, but they are reliable, and they've proven to be very reliable, very cost-effective, massively versatile, light utility vehicles. I mean, they're good at what they were designed to do, and they've really outlived a lot of their usefulness. I mean, they've outlived a lot of things that we look at other equipment, we go, that's a much better, for certain missions. But the Humvee is very universal. The Humvee is the Jeep of the modern NATO military, hands down about it. You can conduct amphibious operations with it. You can fly it in places. You can use it as a medical vehicle. You can use it as a station. You can use it as a transport vehicle. You can use it as a gun truck. You can mount machine guns on it. You can mount a mortar in the back of it. You can put stingers on it. You can do wild things with the Humvee. So many things that you can do with it. You can put more armor on it. You can take the armor off. It's pretty crazy. It's so versatile. It's such a good system. And AM General really hit it out of the park with this system, and I know that they're looking for others for more survivability, but Humvee is... I want one. I want to buy one, use one. I just don't have the money for it. But these Humvees, these medical Humvees, are immensely important because the rough terrain of the front lines. Your normal ambulances aren't going to cut it. You can't do that. They're not going to work. But these are going to be able to get in places that your normal vehicles just aren't going to be able to do. They're not going to be able to get into some of these locations your normal ambulances are. So battlefield light ambulances to move troops around, to ground evac them, are so important. Unbelievably important. Chris said, I got to ride one in Vegas. That was awesome. I lived, ate, slept, worked everything, lived, ate, breathed Humvees for a very long time. Specifically, when I wasn't attached to a line or rifle company, I worked in a CAT platoon. CAT stands for Combined Anti-Armor Team, and you take machine gunners and you take anti-tank missilemen and you put them in armored vehicles. 8 vehicles, doctrinally 8 vehicles in total, 4 vehicles broken down into 2 sections, essentially turning it into 2 squads, forming a platoon. Each section can bring heavy gunfire support, motorized support, screen lining, and you mount tows on one of them. Using the tow missile launcher, you have anti-armor capability. You can screen line, you can observe, you can form blocking positions, convoy escorts, raiding. Anything you can really think of, a CAT platoon can do it. Super versatile. I was super thankful I got to do that because it gave a lot of opportunity to me. But they are not comfortable. Specifically, my bread and butter would be... Where are you at? That one right there. The gun truck. That is the bread and butter for me. This is an old style gun truck. You can see the turret shield there. I was used to with the the newer gun trucks with the wraparound mount on the top, but you can see the trucks, you can see the water can on the back of that one, the water trailer. These are mobile generators. These are all light skin Humvees, great for like command control. These are great for doing shoot and scoots to the 81 millimeter mortars. These right here, some of these are electrical boxes on the back. They're their own generators for power units, larger power units for mobile command posts. But if I can catch one here, they were towards the front. These right here, these are actual command posts, so you can actually operate UAVs out of the back of these things, and you can do command posts in them. You can set up whatever. So you literally could just have a whole command post in the back of a Humvee. It's super crazy. It's crazy what you can do with a lot of these things. So pretty cool. But I never thought the Humvee was super comfortable, though. It is pretty cool, but it's not comfort driven. That's for sure. Germany has suspended aid to the country of Iran. German government is halting some aid projects for Iran because of the suppression of protests by opponents of the regime. The Federal Ministry of Economics announced the foreign trade funding instruments and economic cooperation would be suspended due to the very serious situation. Fortunately, in Paris, 2 people were killed and 4 were injured as a man opened fire in Paris. A 69-year-old gunman opened fire at a Kurdish cultural center and a hairdressing salon in Paris on Friday, was deliberately seeking out foreigners. He had previously been charged with racist violence. At least 2 people are dead and 4 others are wounded. Coming from Emmanuel Macron's official Twitter. And from Nexa. Kurdish individuals ended up clashing with police at the scene of the shooting in Paris. The riots began after police ended up firing tear gas to disperse demonstrators.
Filmcem.
And in Kosovo, we've seen tensions growing in Kosovo. And a border checkpoint, the largest border checkpoint in between Serbia and Kosovo has actually been closed. Reportedly, the government of Kosovo has decided to close its largest border crossing with the country of Serbia. This comes as tensions between the two countries continue to mount, and Serbian protesters have begun blocking the main road on the Serbian side, making it too difficult and dangerous to allow for citizens to cross over. See homemade barricades being listed up by Serbian protesters. These Kosovo security forces, as well as NATO forces who have been building up along the border in case of a conflict. Once again, more Serbian ad hoc roadblocks. So we continue to see more roadblocks and barricades going up, and tensions continue to rise between the two nations. Jump down here and into the Middle East, where we start off in the country of Syria. Coming out of the city of Raqqa, the attacks in Syria ended up killing several Kurdish security officers. An attack in the city of Raqqa has killed 6 members of the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF. SDF commander Mazloum Abdi said in a statement on Monday that an Islamic State cell had targeted security and military buildings in the city, killing 6 fighters and wounding an unspecified number of others. Samad Ali, a spokesman for the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, told the Associated Press that a group of 5 people believed to be part of an ISIS sleeper cell, 2 of them wearing explosive belts, had attacked checkpoints and guard points of Morocco's internal security forces. During the ensuing clashes, he said one of the attackers was killed and another was arrested.
Where is it? Who did it? Yeah.
The Islamic State did end up claiming responsibility for that attack and released a statement saying that 2 militants carried out the attack on the Asayish headquarters in the Daria region. During the attack, they managed to take full control of the headquarters building as well as engage in battle with arriving reinforcements. During the battle, 6 members of the PKK were killed and another 10 were injured, and the number of victims may increase. There you go, straight from the Islamic State themselves. It's not the only event. Down here near Kasham in Deir ez-Zor province, in the city of Muazzan, local residents demand separation from the PKK. Local residents of the Bakara tribe came out to protest, demanding separation from the power of the PKK and the creation of an internal military administration that is not subordinate to the existing parties to the conflict. This happens in response to the murder and rape of 2 girls with direct participation of officials of the PKK military council in the city of Deir ez-Zor. During the protests, members of the tribe burned several cars and a bus for transporting Kurdish communists, as well as the local headquarters of the PKK. So unrest does continue there. In Balochistan province here in Pakistan, unknown gunmen ended up killing 4 servicemen. attack by militants of the Balochistan Liberation Army killed 4 servicemen. Another was injured. The incident occurred on the night of December 23rd and the 24th in the province of Balochistan. The militants fired upon a military convoy and then fled. Additional forces have arrived on scene but were unable to find and neutralize the attackers. And in India, once again, another official did not learn from his friends that he should stay away from windows. So it's best, and so my recommendation, not that I advise anyone to follow it, is it's probably best to stop standing near windows if you happen to be an influential person in Russia. A Russian politician and businessman died during his vacation in India after he fell out of a window. Pavel Antov. And in China, a new wave of COVID is creating chaos. The new wave of COVID is leading to reports of hospitals being overloaded and the dead piling up, including long lines in crematoriums inside of India. And to say that the hospitals are overloaded is to be a understatement.
主任，这是昨天晚上死亡的，到现在还没有拉走的。这个里边是3个，这个走廊里边是4个，然后这是7个了。这个里边还有2个死亡的没有拉走。
哇呀！哎呀，要血命呀！也是搁路上也是整过呀。你看现在摆哪去了呀？都摆开这个会这个出口的厕所这来了呀，要人命了吧。
That's just the line to cremate the dead from one hospital after they finally get them removed. Meanwhile, North and South Korea had a spat. North Korean drones invaded South Korean airspace. On the morning of December 26, 5 North Korean drones flew into South Korea. One of them was able to fly to Seoul, after which he was able to return back. In response, the Republic of Korea forces raised aircraft and troops on alert to intercept the UAVs. As a result of which one of them was shot down, but at the same time, the South Korea lost a K-1 attack aircraft in the crash, and the pilots ejected. This incident was the first time in 5 years that North Korean UAVs had invaded the territory of its southern neighbor.
사고 현장이 바로 제 뒤에 있는 밭인데 잠깐 좀 보여드리면요. 바닥이 검게 그을렸고요. 떨어져 나간 항공기 기체도 좀 보입니다. 차량이 화재 진화에 나서기는 했지만 민간인 피해 등 2차 피해는 발생하지 않았습니다.
So you can see little bits and pieces of what's left of the drone. Tim Ep says, geez, don't want to sound harsh, but with corruption there, how many people are just disappearing? I'm sure a lot. What do you think about the current situation in China in relation to geopolitical situation? China was an unstable country that is hungry for power and is attempting to expand its sphere of influence. Both crisis on real estate market and COVID, how much did that weaken China? I wouldn't say it weakened China very, very much. I think that it actually allowed for the Chinese government to increase its authority and to increase its to tighten its grip on power under Xi Jinping. I don't think it really weakened China because Xi Jinping has enough control over China that he can pretty much put down any kind of unrest. As we jump over here and into Mali, Mali ended up receiving, on December 22nd, Mali received 2 of the coveted Turkish Bayraktar TB2 strike drones in order to fight the Islamic State and JNIM jihadist groups.
De dernière génération de type TB2. Ces équipements viennent à renforcer le vecteur aérien malien présenté donc au ministre de la Défense et des anciens combattants lors de sa visite dans la région de Mopti. Ils ont été acquis grâce au partenariat entre la Turquie et notre pays. Des vols de reconnaissance ont été effectués donc en présence du ministre en charge de la Défense, le colonel Sadio Camara, et sa délégation. Nous allons y revenir en détail sur ces acquisitions dans nos prochaines.
And after only 2 days, after I can only suspect they spent their entire defense budget on these 2 drones, only 2 days after receiving them, on December 24th, the authorities of Mali had announced the crash of one of the TB2 Bayraktars in the Mopti region. The drone was performing a training flight and crashed while landing near the city of Douenza. The cause of the crash has not been reported, but there was reported that there was no casualties on the ground. They've had their coveted TB2 Bayraktars for 2 days, and they crashed one already. We jump now across the Atlantic and down here into South America, where in Viña del Mar, here in Valparaiso, Chile, has declared a state of emergency. The government has declared a state of emergency in Viña del Mar area on Thursday night. A forest fire near the coastal tourist city of Viña del Mar killed at least 2 people while destroying over 400 homes. The fire has consumed more than 272 acres or 110 hectares as firefighters continue to struggle to contain it. And up here in the north, as we get here into the Midwest and Northeast of the United States, we can see where the northern states of the United States, a winter storm is in full swing. where more than 1 million people across the country so far have been left without electricity, and the death toll due to the snowstorm is at least 50 at this moment. More than half of the deaths occurred in western New York. This is the snowstorm that we had on top of the holidays, where we were already kind of thinking, maybe we want to take a break and spend time with family, kind of take a step away from this, for the holidays. This popped up. They are calling this an Arctic bomb, and it was so bad in some locations, including where I am, the temperature dropped 30 degrees in an hour. Sub-zero temperatures, wind chill as low as 25 to negative 30 degrees below zero. 50-mile-an-hour wind gusts and snow that drifted and created whiteout conditions. It made it an absolutely miserable time, and I hope that everyone remains safe throughout it. It was a very miserable time. Unfortunately, more weather is forecasted across the United States, according to the National Weather Service. Where I'm looking at right now, luckily temperatures are supposed to climb almost to 60 throughout the rest of the week this week. But we are looking at, in many places, getting rain at the very least. In some places, it may actually see a drop in temperature again, leading to some additional snow. So I do hope that you guys remain warm, and I hope that you guys remain safe throughout this period of time, if you are like myself and caught in one of these regions affected by these incoming storms. So, very not a fun time. Do not recommend it. To give you a little bit of a taste here, if you guys are not from the region. It is so cold that it would cause frostbite in as little as 10 minutes. But that wraps up this more serious stuff of the night, and we begin to look at something a little bit more uplifting, trying to end the night on at least a positive note. And we jump up here into the San Francisco, San Jose area, where we see that a gene therapy gel is able to heal decades-old wounds. People with blistering skin disease called dystrophic epidermolysis bullosa often suffer from large open wounds that last for years or decades. It's an intensely painful condition, and medical treatment for it has been limited largely to palliative care. Now, a double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial of a gene therapy gel developed at Stanford Medicine shows improved wound healing in 31 people with the disease, including 19 who are 18 years old or younger. 77% of wounds were treated with the gel, which is applied to the skin during bandage changes, completely healed after 6 months of weekly applications, while only 22% of the wounds treated with the placebo did so. Peter Marinkovich, an associate professor of dermatology and a senior author of the study, and his colleagues have applied for the Food and Drug Administration for approval of the gel, which is called BVEC, as a treatment for dystrophic epidermolysis bullosa. It would be the first topical gene therapy treatment approved for the use in the United States. And if you want to have more on that, there is the official article coming from the medical university there at Stanford attached with this. Of course, you can pull it off the map yourselves. But that is everything in the world tonight. I hope that you guys have all learned something, if not a few things. And I hope you've all become a little bit more well-informed as to what's happening in the world around you. Quite a lot of stuff is happening. Quite a lot of stuff happening in Ukraine. A lot of it, unfortunately, a lot of what makes the news is not necessarily very uplifting. It's usually kind of depressing topics. And so please attempt to help us and be the news that gives back and help these people in need throughout the world Once again, we're never doing any kind of super chats. We're never merchandising. We're never monetizing this for personal gain. We want no interest. We have absolutely no interest here on this channel of profiting off of other people's misery. So please help us be the news that gives back by checking out the video description below and supporting one of the amazing organizations down there. 70% or more of their donations, which they receive, go directly to their programs, meaning go directly to helping people, with 30% or less going to assisting going to salaries and administration's costs, to make sure that this money actually goes and gets to people who need it. And with that, I hope that you, your family, and your friends remain safe. And if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. Hope you'll be joining us back once again at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central, on Friday for another 48 hours of news and review. My name is Paul from the New News, and have a fantastic rest of your night and a fantastic Thursday, and I hope to see you back here then. Alrighty, bye now.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всі хвосту змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волноваги, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Нам не треба ні конфлікту, ні війни. Та ми готові всіх вас слать до сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше шверхуйло. То для них нема нічого, крім труни. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волноваги, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. На моей земле тебе один ответ. Нашим людям с кирпичом, даже танки и бочок. Вам не взять нас и за 100 тысяч лет.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волноваги, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Mr. Putin, on behalf of all our guys, no one's scared of your nuclear device. You can take your top 11, shove it up your wrinkle bomb. Oh, we'll come and help you fit it in your skull.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волноваги, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріля до волноваги, чутно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home.